Hi everyone, welcome to another Essex History recording. Today we start talking about a new topic. We're still within the context of genocide, but today we're going to talk about something that's more contemporary, that's more recent, and that is the Rwandan genocide. Just to start off, I have a few pictures here just to give you a sense of what happened. So for instance, this one, I chose this picture just to give you a sense of, how many were victimized, in this genocide. At a certain point, the perpetrators of at least one group, one group of perpetrators were averaging about 8,000 Tutsis. They were killing 8,000 Tutsis a day. So, and we're talking about massacres that happened in the course of about 100 days, so about 3 months. The weapon of choice for many was the machete, as you can see here, and many of these massacres happened inside churches. So churches became sites of mass killings, and in certain cases, even the clergy or the priests were involved in the sense that they handed over people who sought refuge in those buildings, in the churches. They were handed over to the killers. And there are churches in Rwanda that keep, um, you know, the remains of the victims like this. To give you a background, Rwanda is here to the east of the African continent, or some would say Central Africa. In Central Africa, as you can see here, it's surrounded by a good number of countries. It's good to keep them in mind because they come up in the discussion. The capital is Kigali. You have Burundi to the south, Tanzania here, okay, to the east, the the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Zaire at that time, as it was known, then Uganda. Mm, as you can see here, just to give you an idea of the scope, the you know the real horror of the Rwandan genocide, about 800,000 Tutsis were murdered. Okay, and many had to flee the country and go into those neighboring ones for safety. Now, just a backgrounder, okay? Um, by the early 90s, this is the time when, you know, this happened. So Rwanda was a densely populated country, mostly agricultural. A vast majority of the population belonged to a group called the Hutus. The rest were either Tutsis or members of this group of pygmy or indigenous inhabitants of Rwanda, the Twa. Okay, but this conflict is mainly about the conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Now, in many respects, it's quite difficult to distinguish between the two. They share the same language, they shared physical characteristics, but traditionally they were different in terms of occupation. So the Hutus were farmers, while the Tutsis were crop farmers. The Tutsis were, on the other hand, cattle owners, so they own cows. The word Hutu itself means servant, and Tutsi, rich in cattle. Now, traditionally, however, the elite ruling group, in that area. So you can say that in the course of decades and leading up to uh, the Rwandan genocide, these class distinctions, what originally were class distinctions, in the course of many, many years from colonial times up until the 90s, these class distinctions turned into, I suppose, more fixed ethnic distinctions, at least from the point of view of, these two groups. This quotation I got from National Geographic, from an essay on the website that looks back at the genocide. And to me, this is really captivating because it was actually very difficult, as you can see in the text, it was very difficult to tell them apart, to tell whether a person was a Hutu or a Tutsi. That's why you can understand that when the genocide was happening, the Hutus had to put up barricades and checkpoints and check, people's cards, ID cards, or whatever documentation they had with them to check whether they were Tutsis or Hutus. Okay, and this particular essay from the National Geographic, tells the story of militiamen. So these are, um, people with arms, with weapons, but they weren't officially part of the military. So they were groups of armed militias, are groups of armed men, and they attacked a group of school children. They told them, divide yourselves according to ethnicity. You know, Hutus go to that side, Tutsis go to the other. The children refused, whereas presumably because they were friends, they didn't want to, give up their see their friends killed. So the militiamen decided to kill all of them because they couldn't tell the difference. A little bit more of background information, and this is crucial in understanding the conflict. So, for a long time, since the late 19th century, you know, um, remember that the European powers they competed for territories in Africa. So, you know, uh, Rwanda was actually part of German East Africa, but towards the end of the First World War, Rwanda, along with Burundi, would come under the control, the management of Belgium under a League of Nations mandate. Now, the thing with colonial rule with the Belgians was that they actually favored Tutsi rule over the rest of the population. And so you could say, it could be argued that colonial rule contributed to the sharpening of the division between these two groups. And so there was this contributed to the creation of tension between the Hutus and the Tutsis that would explode even before the 60s when Rwanda as a nation gains independence. Um, So in 59, there would be a Hutu revolution because there were fears of a Tutsi invasion from Burundi. By the way, the Hutus and Tutsis also existed in Burundi. Okay, so there was fear of an invasion coming from Burundi. Um, so the Hutus revolted. In consequence, a good number of Tutsis tried to escape the country. By 1961, the Hutus were victorious and they were able to force the Tutsi sovereign or monarch into exile, and Rwanda became a republic. So, officially, in 1962, Belgium would, in quotes, grant independence to Rwanda, But then, the tensions were already there, and the ethnic tensions continued. By 1973, thanks to a military group, so Major General Juvenal Habyarimana, who was a Hutu, a moderate Hutu, came to power. So he was put in a position of power. He becomes the president. So he would be the ruler of Rwanda for the next 20 years, starting from the 70s. He would establish a political party, the National Revolutionary Movement for Development. This is important. If I were you, I would remember this because this would have a big role in the genocide, this party. And, he became president according to a new constitution. So he would rule under a new constitution in 1978. And then he would be re-elected he would rule until the 90s. But then in 1990, a, a Tutsi-led group, the Rwandese Patriotic Front, invaded from Uganda. They were led by Paul Kagame, and it's important to remember that name. Okay, so the current president, Habyarimana, accused local Tutsis of, being sympathetic to and helping out the RPF. So many of them were arrested. The Tutsis were arrested, and there was government-sponsored killings of Tutsis from 1990 to 93. In the meantime, there would be some kind of ceasefire and there would be negotiations between the government and the rebel group, so the RPF. And then, with the mediation of the United Nations, by 1993, Habyarimana would sign an agreement in Tanzania, and part of the agreement was there would be a transitional government, which would a government that would include the rebels, the RPF. So it was a kind of power sharing agreement, understanding, and UN troops were to be present in the country in order to monitor, to ensure that there would be a peaceful transition to that kind of government. Okay, where there would be power sharing between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Unfortunately, disaster would strike again, as you will see in the next recording, and that would let all hell break loose and lead eventually to about 100 days of the Rwandan genocide.